In this video, we will analyze serial killers who have been executed in U.S. history. We will focus on those responsible for the deaths of 3 or more people, exploring their cases, the circumstances of their crimes, and their last meals and words before execution. Welcome to Criminal Records. Alton Coleman. State, Ohio. Between May and July of 1984, Alton Coleman and his accomplice, Deborah Brown, went on a crime spree across 6 states, leaving a trail of murders, rapes, and kidnappings. 8 people were killed by the pair, while others managed to survive their attacks. On June 18th, they kidnapped 2 girls in Gary, Indiana, killing one and leaving the other alive. Over the following weeks, they attacked several victims, including the women and couples, and some survived brutal beatings and strangulations. On July 6th, they murdered a mother and her daughter in Toledo, Ohio, before continuing with more attacks in Cincinnati, Dayton, and Indianapolis. On July 20th, Coleman and Brown were arrested in Evanston, Illinois. A motorist recognized them and alerted the police. They were found in a nearby park and arrested without incident. Upon searching Coleman, officers found a meat knife hidden in his socks and a bag of clothes for disguises. Coleman and Brown were convicted and sentenced to death in Ohio for the murders of Tunny Story and Marlene Walters. Coleman's case went to the U.S. Supreme Court several times, but his appeals were rejected. At the time of his execution, Coleman was the only person in the U.S. with death sentences in 3 states. While Brown awaited her execution date, her sentence was changed to life imprisonment. On April 26, 2002, Alton Coleman was executed by lethal injection at the Lucasville prison in Ohio. For his last meal, he requested a banquet with filet mignon, fried chicken, sweet potato pie, cornbread, onion rings, and cherry coke. When asked for his last words, Coleman began reciting Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Andrew Kokoralais. State, Illinois. In 1981, one of the most terrifying groups of the last decades emerged, a satanic cult and organized crime ring led by Robin Gecht and his 3 accomplices, Edward Spreitzer and the brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokoralais. They were linked to the disappearance and murder of at least 17 women in Illinois between 1981 and 1982, in addition to an unrelated homicide in a drive-by shooting. Robin Gecht was the first to be arrested. During the investigation, it was discovered that in 1981 he had rented a motel with Edward Spreitzer and the Kokoralais brothers. Under interrogation, Thomas Kokoralais confessed the gruesome details. The victims were taken to what Gecht called a satanic chapel, where they were tortured, raped, and had their breasts amputated, which were consumed in rituals. The Kokoralais brothers and Spreitzer confessed their involvement, but Gecht always denied his guilt. Thomas Kokoralais was sentenced to life in prison, although his sentence was reduced, and he was released in March 2019. Spreitzer and Andrew Kokoralais were sentenced to death, but in 2003, Spreitzer's sentence was commuted. On March 17, 1999, Andrew Kokoralais was executed by lethal injection, becoming the only member of the group to receive the death penalty and the last person executed in the state of Illinois. He refused his last meal, and in his final statement he said, "To the Borowski family, I deeply regret your loss. I say this with all sincerity." He then quoted verses from the books of Exodus and Proverbs and concluded with a message of repentance. "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near." Anjo Maturino Resendiz, State, Texas. Anjo Maturino Resendiz, known as the Railroad Killer, was a Mexican serial killer responsible for at least 10 confirmed murders between 1986 and 1999, although it is suspected that he may have killed more than 16 people. His modus operandi involved traveling clandestinely on trains and attacking victims who lived near the railroad tracks. Resendiz killed his victims with blunt objects like rocks and picks, and sometimes also sexually assaulted them. After committing the crimes, he would stay in his victims' homes, eat, and steal valuable items, which he would send to his wife and mother in Mexico. On June 21, 1999, the FBI included him in their 10 most wanted fugitives list, and weeks later, his sister Manuela contacted authorities to negotiate his surrender. On July 13, 1999, Resendiz voluntarily turned himself in to the Texas Rangers at a border bridge between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. During his trial, he claimed to have been deceived by authorities and showed signs of mental instability. Despite attempts by the Mexican government to prevent his execution, he was sentenced to death on May 22, 2000 by a Texas court. On June 27, 2006, Angel Maturino Resendiz was executed by lethal injection. In his final statement, he said, "I want to ask if it is in your heart to forgive me. You don't have to. I know I allowed the devil to rule my life. I just ask that you forgive me and ask the Lord to forgive me for allowing the devil to deceive me." He was pronounced dead at 8:05 p.m. Anthony Shore. State, Texas. Anthony Allen Shore, known as the Houston Strangler, was a serial killer who terrorized Harris County, Texas, between 1986 and 1995. He used ropes or cords to strangle his victims, most of whom were young women whom he would abduct before killing them. On September 26, 1986, Shore kidnapped a 15-year-old teenager and strangled her with a cord, leaving her body behind a restaurant. In the following years, he repeated the same pattern with victims between the ages of 9 and 21, leaving their bodies in different parts of the city. For more than a decade, Shore's crimes went unsolved. It wasn't until 2003 when DNA analysis linked him to the crime scenes, leading to his arrest. After confessing to the murders, during the sentencing phase, the only victim who survived his attack testified. The jury, after less than an hour of deliberation, recommended the death penalty, a sentence that Shore himself had requested. He was finally sentenced to death on November 15, 2004. On January 18, 2018, Anthony Shore was executed by lethal injection in Texas. In his final statement, he said, "I would like to take a moment to say that I am sorry. No amount of words can undo what I've done. To the family of my victims, I wish I could change the past. It is what it is. God bless you all. I will die with a clear conscience. I have found my peace." He was pronounced dead at 6:28 p.m. Carlton Gary, State, Georgia. Between 1977 and 1978, Columbus, Georgia, was terrorized by a series of murders known as the Stalking Stranglings. Around 8 women were attacked and strangled in their own homes. The attacker did not attempt to conceal his crimes, and his modus operandi involved selecting elderly women, generally living alone and vulnerable, as his victims. Carlton Michael Gary was arrested on May 3, 1984, in Albany, Georgia, after an investigation traced a stolen gun found at one of the victims' homes to his possession. Gary had a long criminal history, and in 1986 he was convicted of 5 of the stranglings and sentenced to death. Though he was suspected of at least 4 more murders, he was never tried for them. Carlton eventually confessed to committing those crimes. Despite Gary's partial confession and identification by a surviving victim, some people in Columbus doubted his guilt due to his above-average intelligence, IQ of 115, and charismatic personality. On December 1, 2009, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeal. However, on December 16, just hours before his execution, the Georgia Supreme Court stayed to evaluate the possibility of conducting DNA testing. Finally, on February 23, 2018, a new execution date was set. On March 15, 2018, Carlton Gary was executed by lethal injection. He died at 10:33 p.m. and declined to make a final statement. Carol Cole, State, Nevada. Between 1948 and 1980, Carol Edward Eddie Cole carried out a series of murders across different states in the U.S. He was confirmed to be responsible for the deaths of at least 15 people, although he claimed to have killed more than 30. His first victim was a classmate whom he drowned in a lake when he was only 8 years old, a crime that was initially considered an accident until he confessed to it in prison years later. Cole selected his victims in bars and taverns, typically women who reminded him of his mother, whom he hated for her infidelity. His method of murder was strangulation, and in at least one case he implied that he had practiced cannibalism. He was arrested in November 1980 in Dallas, Texas, after being linked to a crime scene. Although the police initially had no suspicion of him, Cole voluntarily confessed to all of his murders. In 1981, he was sentenced to life imprisonment in Texas, but later agreed to face new charges in Nevada, where he was sentenced to death for 2 murders committed in 1977 and 1979. On December 6, 1985, Carol Cole was executed by lethal injection at the Nevada State Prison. For his last meal, he requested giant fried shrimp, French fries, salad with French dressing, and Boston clam chowder. In his final words, he thanked the judge for the sentence. Hours after his death, his brain was removed and studied at the University of Nevada, Reno, in an attempt to find anomalies. Danny Lee Barber. State, Texas. Between 1978 and 1980, the county of Dallas, Texas, was the scene of a series of murders committed by Danny Lee Barber. His modus operandi involved robberies that escalated into brutal assaults and murders. He was attributed with 4 confirmed victims, all women, whom he attacked with knives or firearms. Barber was arrested on May 6, 1980, while in the Dallas County Jail on robbery charges. During his detention, he confessed to having murdered 3 more people over a period of 2 years. His most well-known crime was the murder of Janice Louise Ingram in October 1979, whom he beat and stabbed to death during a robbery attempt at her home in Balch Springs. According to his confession, he attacked her with a metal pipe he found in her backyard while trying to enter the house. He received life imprisonment for 3 of the murders, but was sentenced to death for the murder of Janice Ingram. While on death row, he sold cross-stitch embroidery through a website. On February 11, 1999, Danny Lee Barber was executed by lethal injection in Texas. His last statement was, "Hello, Miss Ingram, it is good to see you. I said I could talk, but I don't think I am going to be able to. I heard one of your nieces had some angry words. I didn't have anything to do with the stay. I spent the last 20 years waiting to figure out what's going on. I pray that you get over it, and that's the only thing I can think to say. I'm regretful for what I done, but I'm a different person from that time. If you could get to know me over the years, you could have seen it. I've got some people over here that believes that. I want to talk to my friends over here for a second. Well, it's good to see you guys. Look after Mary Lynn for me. Like I said, I've called my mother already, so she knows. Goodbye." Danny Rolling. State, Florida. Daniel Harold Rolling, known as the Gainesville Ripper, terrorized Florida in August 1990 by brutally murdering 5 students from the University of Gainesville over a 4-day period. Rolling, who already had a history of violent crimes, raped and mutilated his victims, even decapitating one of them and posing the bodies in macabre positions. He later confessed to a triple homicide in Shreveport, Louisiana, as well as an attempted murder of his own father. He was arrested in September 1990, and in 1994 he pled guilty to the murders. He was diagnosed with antisocial and borderline personality disorders, as well as paraphilia. According to his own statements, his motive was to gain notoriety, similar to that of killers like Ted Bundy. Rolling was sentenced to death and executed at Florida State Prison on October 25, 2006. For his last meal, he requested lobster tail. He did not give any final statement, but in his final moments, strapped to the execution gurney, he began singing a gospel hymn in front of a room full of witnesses. Who threw the stars into the sky, created the oceans, the mountains, the eagles, and the doves, no one greater than you, O Lord, no one greater than you. Danny was declared dead at 6:13 p.m. his brutality and the media impact of his crimes served as inspiration for the iconic horror film Scream, written by Kevin Williamson. David Alan Gore. State: Florida. David Alan Gore was a serial killer known for committing 6 murders between 1981 and 1983, along with his cousin Fred Waterfield. The press dubbed them the Killer Cousins. Gore was sentenced to death, while Waterfield received a life sentence. Throughout his youth, Gore developed an obsession with firearms and women, which led to a series of horrific crimes. Gore's victims were young women who were raped and murdered. Confirmed victims include Hee-Sang Huang Ling and her daughter Ying Hua Ling, as well as several other women. In his final moments, Gore apologized to the family of one of the victims, Mrs. Elliott, mother of Lynn Elliott, and expressed remorse for his crimes. His last statement was as follows: "I would like to say to Mr. and Mrs. Elliott that I am very sorry for my involvement in the death of their daughter. Above all, I wish my death could bring her back. I am not the same man today that I was 28 years ago. When I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior, I became a new creation in Christ, and I know that God has truly forgiven me for my past sins. I am able to face them today because I know Christ lives in me." The Apostle Paul said, "To die is gain." So, I do not fear today as I truly look forward to spending eternity with Christ. Mr. and Mrs. Elliott, I have prayed for both of you, and I will pray that you find the peace that only Christ can give. Finally, I just want to say that I have had an enormous amount of regret, and I will pray for you and your family that you may forgive me. God bless you all. Gore was executed on April 12, 2012, after spending 28 years on death row. He was declared dead at 6:19 p.m. by lethal injection. His last meal consisted of fried chicken, French fries, and butter pecan ice cream. David Edwin Mason. State: California. David Edwin Mason was a serial killer who murdered at least 5 people, including 4 elderly individuals in 1980 in Oakland, California. He was also responsible for the death of his cellmate in 1982, as well as that of his lover, Robert Groff, in 1980. After his arrest on February 4, 1981, Mason recorded a confession on a tape, later found by authorities, in which he detailed the murders and his motive behind them. This confession led to his arrest and charges for multiple homicides. While in prison, Mason was charged with an additional murder, that of Boyd Wayne Johnson, another inmate, whom he killed with his cellmate, Quentin Shorter. Mason also confessed to this murder and expressed remorse for his crimes. Before his execution in 1993, Mason requested not to be visited by his family and asked that his meal be the same as the other inmates. He rejected a special last meal and only requested a glass of water with ice. During the execution, Mason did not give a final statement and reportedly simply said, "No, Warden, I want to proceed. Thank you, Warden." Mason was executed on August 24, 1993, in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison at 12:23 p.m. Despite being given the opportunity to halt the execution at any time by indicating his desire to file an appeal, which his lawyer had already prepared, he never did. His death occurred 7 minutes after entering the gas chamber. Elroy Chester. State: Texas. Elroy Chester was a serial killer, rapist, and thief who committed 5 murders in Port Arthur, Texas, between 1997 and 1998. In addition to the murders, during this 6-month period, Chester was responsible for numerous robberies, sexual assaults, and shootings in the same area. Chester was arrested and convicted of one of the murders, and he was sentenced to death. He was executed on June 12, 2013, at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. The execution was initially scheduled for April 24, 2013, but it was delayed due to an error in the execution order. Chester's execution was controversial, as his defense argued that he suffered from severe intellectual disability, which, according to the ruling in Atkins v. Virginia, made him ineligible for the death penalty. However, the appeal was rejected, and Chester was executed at the age of 44. His final statement was made on the gurney before the execution. He asked the victims not to hate him for his crimes and thanked his attorney for his support during the trial. In his statement, he expressed remorse, saying, "I just want to say that I don't want you to hate me for taking your loved one. I know it doesn't mean anything. I told the truth because I believe you should know who killed your loved one. God sees everything. Don't hate me. If you do, you'll have to deal with him later. As for me, live your life, but don't hate me. I'm sorry I took your loved one." To the attorney, "Thank you for fighting for me in court. Thank you for supporting me all these years. Elroy Chester wasn't a bad man, I knew that. Many people say I didn't commit those murders, but I really did. That's my statement. Warden, you can proceed." Chester was declared dead at 7:04 p.m. Gary Ray Bowles. State, Florida. Gary Ray Bowles was a serial killer who murdered 6 homosexual men in 1994 along the Interstate 95 corridor. His killing spree began on March 15, 1994, in Daytona Beach, Florida, when he murdered John Hardy Roberts, who had offered him shelter. Bowles beat, strangled, and inserted a towel into Roberts' throat, leaving his fingerprints at the crime scene. Over the next 6 months, Bowles continued his murderous rampage in Florida, Georgia, and Maryland, always using the same modus operandi, gaining his victims' trust, brutally beating them, strangling them, and stealing their money and credit cards. Among his victims were Milton Bradley, David Jarman, Walter Jamel Hinton, Alverson Carter Jr., and Albert Morris. He was captured on October 22, 1995 in Jacksonville, and he later confessed to the 6 murders. Bowles was sentenced to death in 1996 for the murder of Walter Jamel Hinton. He was executed by lethal injection on August 22, 2019 at Florida State Prison. His last meal consisted of 3 cheeseburgers, French fries, and bacon. Before his execution, Bowles did not make a final statement in the room, but he left behind a letter in which he wrote, "I want to begin by saying I am very sorry to all the family and friends of Mr. Hinton. I never meant to kill him, and I regret all the pain and suffering I have caused. I hope my death will erase your pain. Gerald Eugene Stano." State, Florida. Gerald Eugene Stano was a serial killer who confessed to committing over 40 murders between 1969 and 1980. Born on September 12, 1951, in Florida, he was adopted shortly after birth. He struggled academically and socially during his childhood, which led to academic failure. After attending a military academy in Virginia, he graduated and worked various jobs, although he was frequently fired for stealing money or arriving late. Stano's first victims were in New Jersey in 1969. He then moved to Pennsylvania, where he killed over a dozen women before returning to Florida, where he became a prolific killer. His victims were mainly, though he also targeted other young women, including a cheerleader. His methods varied, including shootings, stabbings, and strangulations, but he never committed sexual assaults, claiming that murder alone was sufficient for him. He was captured in 1980 in Daytona Beach after one of his victims managed to escape. While in prison, Stano confessed to 41 murders in detailed statements. In Florida, he was officially charged with 24 homicides and received 8 life sentences and 1 death sentence. Stano was executed on March 23, 1998, in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. His last meal request included a Delmonico steak, a baked potato with sour cream and bacon bits, salad with blue cheese dressing, beans, half a gallon of mint chocolate chip ice cream, and 2 liters of Pepsi. Before his execution, Stano proclaimed his innocence and blamed the lead investigator, Paul Crowe, saying, "I am innocent. I am scared. I was threatened and held for months without proper legal representation. I confessed to crimes I did not commit." Briley Brothers. State, Virginia: Linwood Earl Briley, James Dyrell, J.B., Briley Jr., and their brother Anthony were responsible for a series of murders, rapes, and robberies in Richmond, Virginia in 1979. Along with their accomplice Duncan Eric Meekins, they carried out a massacre that terrorized the city, resulting in at least 11 fatalities. The Briley brothers began their criminal activities at an early age, with Linwood committing his first murder at the age of 16 in 1971. In March 1979, Linwood and J.B. began a series of crimes that continued until October of the same year. The victims were chosen randomly, and the brothers committed murders, rapes, and robberies with brutal cruelty. One of the most notorious attacks occurred on October 19th, when they killed Harvey Wilkerson, his pregnant wife Judy Diane Barton, and their son Harvey Wayne Barton. This murder led to their capture after the brothers were seen running down the street. During interrogation, Anthony Meekins, their accomplice brother, accepted a plea deal and provided key details about the crimes, leading to the conviction of the Briley brothers. Linwood and J.B. were sentenced to death, while Anthony received a life sentence. In 1984, Linwood and J.B. staged a daring escape from death row, but were recaptured and ultimately executed. Linwood was executed on October 12, 1984, and J.B. on April 18, 1985, both in the electric chair. Linwood's last words were, "I'm innocent," while J.B. asked the witnesses if they were happy now. Their executions were followed by protests from some inmates who attempted to delay the process. Both brothers were buried in the Council Family Cemetery in Bethel, North Carolina. Joseph Paul Franklin. State, Missouri: Joseph Paul Franklin, originally named James Clayton Vaughn, Jr., was an American serial killer. He was convicted of several murders, and it is believed that his total victim count exceeds 20 people. For these crimes, Franklin received 6 life sentences and 1 death sentence. He confessed to attempting to murder 2 prominent men, magazine publisher Larry Flynt in 1978 and civil rights activist Vernon Jordan Jr. in 1980. Both survived their injuries, although Flynt was permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Despite his confessions, Franklin was not convicted in those cases. Motivated by his hatred for African Americans and Jews, Franklin sought to incite a race war and identified as a white supremacist. Franklin spent 15 years on death row awaiting execution in Missouri for the murder of Gerald Gordon, which occurred in 1977. He was executed at the Bonne Terre Correctional Center in Missouri on November 20, 2013. The execution began at 6:07 p.m., and he was declared dead at 6:17 p.m. It was Missouri's first execution to use only pentobarbital, without the traditional 3-drug cocktail. After receiving the injection, Franklin showed no signs of pain, though his breathing became labored and his chest slowed until it eventually stopped. Kenneth Granville. State, Texas: Kenneth Granville was an American serial killer and rapist responsible for the deaths of 7 people in Fort Worth, Texas, between 1974 and 1975. His crimes were believed to be sexually motivated, and he was particularly brutal in the mass murder of 3 women and 2 children. After voluntarily confessing to his crimes, he was sentenced to death and executed in 1996 after several appeals and delays in his sentence. Granville had worked in various jobs and was described by those who knew him as a kind and reliable man. However, his military history was marked by aggressive behavior, which led to his dishonorable discharge. Despite appearing as a respectable individual, Granville began committing murders after feeling violent impulses. In his first murder on October 8, 1974, he killed several people in the McClendon family's apartment. He continued his killing spree in 1975, being captured after an attack on his friends and later confessing to the murders. Granville was sentenced to death, and his execution, which was postponed multiple times, took place at the Huntsville unit in Texas on February 27, 1996, via lethal injection. Michael Bruce Ross. State, Connecticut: Michael Bruce Ross was an American serial killer who committed his crimes between 1981 and 1984, with a confirmed total of 8 victims, though it is believed he may have committed more. His modus operandi involved kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and then killing young women. Ross's victims were primarily teenage girls and young women, and the crimes took place in New York and Connecticut. The confirmed victims of Michael Bruce Ross were Zung Ngat Tu, 25, a Cornell University student, murdered on May 12, 1981. Tammy Williams, 17, from Brooklyn, Connecticut, murdered on January 5, 1982. Paula Pereira, 16, from Wallkill, New York, murdered in March 1982. Deborah Smith Taylor, 23, from Griswold, murdered on June 15, 1982. Robin Stavinsky, 19, from Norwich, Connecticut, murdered in November 1983. April Brunius, 14, from Griswold, murdered on April 22, 1984. Leslie Shelley, 14, from Griswold, murdered on April 22, 1984. Wendy Baribeau, 17, from Griswold, murdered on June 13, 1984. Ross was arrested in 1984, and after his arrest, he confessed to the murders. He was sentenced to death in 1987. During his time in prison, he converted to Catholicism and expressed his desire for his execution to be carried out as soon as possible to end the suffering of the victims and their families. For his final meal the day before his execution, Ross chose the standard prison meal, which consisted of turkey a la king with rice, mixed vegetables, white bread, fruit, and a drink. On May 13, 2005, Michael Bruce Ross was executed in Connecticut by lethal injection, making it the first execution in the state in over 40 years. Ross did not make any final statement before his execution. Michael Lee Lockhart. State, Texas. Michael Lee Lockhart was an American serial killer who was sentenced to death in 3 states, Florida, Indiana, and Texas. He was executed on December 9, 1997 by the state of Texas. Lockhart was arrested after a high-speed chase when he was identified driving a stolen Chevrolet Corvette in Beaumont, Texas. During the investigation, it was discovered that Officer Paul Halsey Jr. had been murdered at the motel where Lockhart was staying. Lockhart was subsequently convicted of Halsey's murder in Texas. He was also found guilty of murdering Wendy Gallagher, 16, in Griffith, Indiana, and Jennifer Kohlhauer, 14, in Land O'Lakes, Florida, receiving death sentences in both states. He was also suspected of the murder of Kathy Hobbs, a 16-year-old girl who was kidnapped in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1987, but her case remains unsolved. In his final hours, Lockhart requested a last meal consisting of a double cheeseburger, fries, and Coca-Cola. His last words were, "A lot of people think what's going on here is bad, but I want you to know that here I found love and compassion. I thank those who work here for their kindness and deeply appreciate everything they've done for me. That's all, Warden. I'm ready." Lockhart's execution was followed by applause from nearly 100 Beaumont police officers who cheered as witnesses left the prison. He is buried at the Captain Joe Bird Cemetery in Huntsville, Texas. Oba Chandler. State, Florida. Oba Chandler was convicted and executed for the murder of Joan Rogers and her 2 daughters, Michelle and Christe, whose deaths occurred in June 1989 in Tampa Bay, Florida. The victims' bodies were found floating in the water, with their hands and feet bound and ropes around their necks. Autopsies revealed that the women were thrown into the water while they were still alive. Chandler, a contractor for aluminum siding without a license, was identified as the killer in 1992 after a brochure with his handwriting was found in the victim's car. A subsequent handwriting analysis and fingerprint evidence confirmed his involvement. Chandler was arrested on September 24, 1992. During the trial, Chandler claimed he had met the victims and gave them directions, but denied any involvement in their murders. Despite his defense attempts, the evidence against him was overwhelming, including phone calls he made from his boat the night of the murders and witnesses who linked him to other similar incidents. He was sentenced to death in 1994. Chandler spent 17 years on death row, but never admitted his guilt. In his final written statement, he left a message for the prison officials. "Today, they are killing an innocent man." Despite his insistence on his innocence, he was executed on November 15, 2011 at Florida State Prison. In 2014, DNA evidence confirmed that Chandler was also responsible for the murder of Ivelisse Berrios Beguris, a crime committed in 1990. Oscar Ray Bolin, Jr. State, Florida. Oscar Ray Bolin, Jr. was convicted for the murders of 3 young women in Florida in 1986. On January 25th, the body of Natalie Holly was found in an orange grove with multiple stab wounds. In November, Stephanie Collins disappeared, and her remains were found a month later. The body of Terry Lynn Matthews was discovered on the same day, showing signs of stabbing and blunt force trauma. Bolin was arrested in 1990 and faced 3 trials, being convicted in all of them. Despite multiple appeals, his guilt was consistently reaffirmed, and he was sentenced to death. What makes Bolin's case even more shocking is the love story that developed while he was in prison. In 1996, Rosalie Bolin, a woman from Florida, met Oscar while working in the Public Defender's Office of Hillsborough County and was assigned to his case. After reviewing the evidence, Rosalie became convinced of his innocence, and after 2 years of close collaboration, she fell in love with him. Rosalie left behind her previous life, including a marriage and 4 daughters, to marry Bolin in a phone ceremony from prison. She became his most ardent supporter and continued to fight for his freedom until his execution. Oscar Ray Bolin, Jr. was executed by lethal injection on January 7, 2016, at the Florida State Prison in Stark. He became the first prisoner executed in the United States that year. Before his execution, he requested his last meal, which consisted of meat, baked potatoes, salad, garlic bread, lemon meringue pie, and a soda. At the time of his execution, Bolin chose not to make any final statement. Paul Ezra Rhodes. State, Idaho. Paul Ezra Rhodes was a serial killer convicted for 3 murders committed in Idaho during a 3-week crime spree in 1987. He was also suspected of at least 4 additional murders in Utah and Wyoming since 1984, though he was never conclusively linked to those crimes. He was executed in 2011, becoming the first person to be executed in Idaho in more than 17 years. Between March 1st and March 21st, 1987, Rhodes committed a series of murders in Idaho, killing Stacey Dawn Baldwin, Nolan Haddon, and Susan Michelbacher. He was arrested on March the 27th in Nevada, and ballistic evidence linked him to the crimes. In January 1988, he was sentenced to death for the murder of Baldwin and received another life sentence for related offenses. In his 3rd trial for the murder of Haddon, he pled guilty but continued to deny responsibility for the crime. He received 2 additional life sentences. Paul Ezra Rhodes was executed by lethal injection on November 18, 2011, at the Idaho State Maximum Security Institution. In his final statement, he showed signs of remorse and confusion. He partially admitted responsibility for the death of Susan Michelbacher, but continued to deny his involvement in the murders of Baldwin and Haddon. His last words were, "I regret the role I played in the death of your wife. As for Haddon, you still have to keep looking. I can't help you. I'm sorry for your family. I can't help you. I was involved in the death of Michelbacher. I can't help you. I'm sorry." Before receiving the lethal injection, he simply said to his mother, "Mom, goodbye." And to the witnesses of the execution, he said, "Guys, I forgive you, really." His last meal consisted of hot dogs with sauerkraut, mustard, ketchup, onions, and pickle relish, served with baked beans, veggie sticks with ranch dressing, fruit with gelatin, and strawberry ice cream cups. He received the same meal as the other inmates that night. Stephen Wayne Anderson. State, California. Stephen Wayne Anderson was a serial killer and hitman who confessed or was attributed with at least 8 homicides, including contract killings and the murder of a fellow inmate. In 1971, he committed his first violent crime by robbing a school in New Mexico and threatening police officers. He was sentenced to prison, and while serving time in Utah in 1977, he murdered an inmate named Blundell and attacked another prisoner and a guard. On May 26, 1980, Anderson entered the home of Elizabeth Lyman, an 81-year-old retired teacher in California. He cut her phone line, broke into her house, and when she woke up and screamed, he shot her in the face with a .45 caliber pistol. He then ransacked the house for money and made himself a meal in the kitchen. He was arrested at the scene after a neighbor reported the crime, and he confessed to the murder. In addition, Anderson admitted to committing 6 contract killings in Las Vegas and another murder in the mountains of Utah after escaping from prison in 1979. In 1981, he was sentenced to death in California. During the trial, the prosecution described him as an extremely violent and irredeemable individual. On January 29, 2002, he was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin. His last meal included cheese sandwiches, radishes, peach pie, and chocolate chip ice cream. He did not make any final statement. Stephen Peter Morin. State, Texas. Stephen Peter Morin was an American serial killer responsible for at least 48 violent crimes, including the murders of at least 40 women and 7 men during the 1970s and early 1980s. His criminal history spanned several states in the U.S., and he was pursued by the FBI in the early 1980s. Morin used different aliases and lived a fugitive lifestyle due to his erratic movements. In 1976, Morin began his criminal career by kidnapping and assaulting a 14-year-old girl in San Francisco. Throughout the decade, he committed a series of kidnappings and murders, with his first known crime occurring in 1976. In 1980, he kidnapped Cheryl Ann Daniel in Las Vegas, and her body was found in Utah months later, linking him to other crimes. He continued his killing spree across various states until he was arrested in December 1981 after a standoff in San Antonio. During his trial, Morin was convicted of multiple murders, including those of Carrie Ann Scott and Jana Bruce. Although he confessed to some crimes, he never fully cooperated with investigations. He was sentenced to death in Texas in 1984 for the murder of Sheila Whalen. On March 13, 1985, Morin was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. His last meal consisted of a steak, baked potatoes, pea salad, banana pudding, and coffee. His final words were, "Father, forgive these people, for they know not what they do. Forgive them as you have forgiven me, and I have forgiven them. Lord Jesus, I commend my soul to you." He was declared dead at 12:55 a.m. Ted Bundy. State, Florida. Ted Bundy was an American serial killer responsible for the deaths of at least 30 women between 1973 and 1978. Although some experts believe his victim count was much higher. His ability to evade justice for years and his charismatic demeanor made him one of the most notorious killers in history. Bundy committed his first crime in 1974 when he kidnapped and assaulted Carol Durant in Utah, who managed to escape and report him. Days later, he was arrested, and handcuffs were found in his car, linking him to other kidnappings. However, Bundy escaped custody twice, with his second escape taking him to Tallahassee, Florida, where he continued his killing spree. On January 15, 1978, Bundy attacked 4 women at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy were murdered, while Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler survived, though both were severely injured. He later attacked Cheryl Thomas, another woman, who also survived but was gravely wounded. A month later, he kidnapped and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, whose body was found months later near the Suwannee River. Bundy was arrested in February 1978, and during his trial, forensic experts identified bite marks on the victims that matched Bundy's dental impressions. He was convicted of 2 murders and sentenced to death. His case changed the public perception of serial killers, as his boy-next-door appearance defied preconceived ideas about serial murderers. Furthermore, his case played a key role in the development of VICAP, Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, a national FBI database for linking serial crimes. Bundy was executed on January 24, 1989, at the age of 42 at Florida State Prison, where he was electrocuted. His execution became a media spectacle, with coverage of his trial and execution broadcast live on television. The news of his death was met with relief and celebration across the state, with many people gathering to toast to his demise. His final words were, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends."